Hi, Ashes to Life. My name's Turk. I'm a faithful believer in Jesus Christ, and I struggle with post traumatic stress and childhood traumas. One of my main struggles is depression. Um, I'm here tonight to tell you my testimony. So, thank you, Pastor Mark, for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to share with you guys a little bit about my story. So, my life before recovery was a little shady, like most of us, I'm sure, if we're sitting here tonight. Let me start off with I was born and raised in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, just a couple miles downriver from you guys. And I was born into a family of a loving mother and a loving father. And they had their faults, but they did the best they could. Dad worked at a supermarket, and mom worked, odd job to make ends meet when we were growing up. So, rich we were not growing up. I also struggled with weight when I was a kid. So you can imagine a fat little white kid going to Aliquippa High School, going out to Aliquippa School District, was not a fun time for me. Um, when I was about 2 years old, my dad and my sister and I got into a car accident, and my sister had to be um, life flighted to Children's Hospital from what is now old Aliquippa Hospital to have emergency brain surgery. Because of that, it drastically altered the way our lives would be from that point on. It made me have to grow up very quickly. Life became about taking care of my sister and my parents' sole, responsibility and some of their guilt was stemmed from that accident, and it forced me into a place where I felt like I was abandoned as a kid. Subsequently, because of that, I think as maybe not because of it, but as part of that, when I was about 10 years old, I was sexually molested by an older family member. One of my cousins um, abused me for about 2 years every summer, and because of that, because of the fear that was attached to that and the threat that he had put on my life, um, it caused me to bottle up all of my emotions, and finally I hit a breaking point as a young 12-year-old and blew up. And I told someone that was very close to me. I told my mom, and she asked me what she wanted me to do, what I wanted her to do about it. I'm 12 years old. I don't know what this is supposed to feel like, and I've just shared a very deep, dark secret with someone who I thought was supposed to protect me, and they didn't. So I buried that, and I carried that with me uh, for the rest of my life. And um, I graduated high school in about 2004. In 2004, so most of you know that 2001 on the September 11th, the towers were struck by an airplane because of some terroristic attacks on our nation, and that really stuck stuck a turning point in my life. See, I always had this sense of patriotism within me. I love our country. I love what our country represents to other countries, and how we're kind of like we kind of play the good guy all the time, or at least we paint the picture that way. So I joined the United States Marine Corps. Um, After I graduated from boot camp, I also married my first wife, my high school sweetheart, and we moved around the world. We moved around the country. So I went to my first school, finished my schools, and got to my first duty station in the Marines in 2005. And um, a month and a half later, I was in the desert on my first deployment. Uh, I spent 7 to 8 months in Iraq that tour, and then came home for about 3.5 months, and headed back out for my second tour in the same desert and sandbox. During that time, during that second deployment, I found out that um, my first wife was cheating on me the entire time I was in Iraq, the first time and the second. Um, that was a really low point for me. I'm in the middle of the desert, and it's an incredibly painful experience to hear those words. I made it halfway. So I came back, moved out of our home, and started drinking. And from that time on, up until about 2014, I was an on again, off again, functional drunk. I was super Marine during the day and lonely, depressed person at night. My first wife and I got divorced, and I met my second wife and started dating her, and found out I was leaving for my third deployment. This was around 2008, and we being young kids and me being worried about everything but what I should be thinking about at that time, we decided to be a great idea to get married, and we did. And I came home. I left for that deployment and came home, and we ended up having our first kid that following September. Life seemed to take some sort of normalcy during those times. We even attended church once or twice. I had taken orders to come back here in Pennsylvania for a brief stint to try to get out of the deployment cycle and try to have a family and raise our son. And we got orders to move to New Jersey. And while we were in New Jersey, my son's mother decided that she didn't want to be married anymore, that it just was too hard for her. And so she left and took my son with her. And a year later, we were divorced. So here I am, a lonely, overworked Marine in a place where I only know other Marines, and what do Marines do best but fight and drink, and so that's what I did. A lot of that. Work was, in the Marine Corps, life was 6-day work weeks with 14 to 16 hour days. I did a whole lot of awesome things when I was in the Marine Corps, and I'll never regret my time there. But the last few years were really hard. I worked as a maintenance controller, and what a maintenance controller I was responsible for setting the flight schedule and setting the maintenance priorities for the squadron. So there's a lot of responsibility on my shoulders, while also trying to and not succeeding on dealing with, say hi to my cat King, trying to and not succeeding at dealing with my emotional strains and stresses and traumas. In 2013, in the beginning of 2013, I decided it was time to get out of the Marine Corps. I was tired, physically, emotionally, spiritually exhausted. So I found a job in Ohio and got out of the Marine Corps. My contract was up in July, and I started working in August. Well, it wasn't too long that my drinking habit caught up to me, and this awesome opportunity at a steel mill just across the border in Ohio turned into one of the next biggest failures of my life. And they found out I was a drunk and fired me about a week short of the end of my probation period. I'd have to say that was probably the lowest point. You see, I could always hide my drinking when I was in the Marine Corps. It was socially acceptable. We didn't talk about our feelings. We dealt with them through the camaraderie and carousing and chasing of women and things like that. We never actually talked about the things that were hurting us because, real men and tough and Marines don't cry and we're not scared. I can promise you that there is no atheist on a battlefield. I remember crying out to God a few times while I was in the desert, and hearing something that I thought was, that I know now is him. So I lose that job, and I didn't know what to do. Um, so I moved listlessly from one bottle of Jameson to the next for the better part of a for the better part of 6 months, sleeping on this person's couch or sleeping on that person's couch, and moving from warm spot to warm spot. I started talking to a pastor. Something said, you need to go talk to this guy. And I started talking to this pastor friend of mine, and we started to meet. And he's told me that I should check out this place in Aliquippa called Uncommon Grounds. And I told him, yeah, right, because they don't serve beer there. And I wanted nothing to do with it. In June of 2014, he finally dragged me into there for breakfast one morning. We were on our way to a men's retreat in North Carolina, and we met there for breakfast. Now, I was probably on the wrong end of a bad hangover at that point when I rolled in there, and the smell of food was not something that I wanted to do. But I met the staff there. I met this guy named Mike and this little crazy woman named Maria who was covered in tattoos, and they welcomed me like family. We sat there what felt like hours talking and just trading what our dreams and aspirations were, and I really felt welcomed into that atmosphere there. I felt like I belonged somewhere, and it's something that had been missing for years, ever since I left the Marine Corps. And we talk about, the Marine Corps was only a year prior to this, but it felt right. I don't know if you know what that feels like. So it was while I was on this retreat that I had this incredible experience where the Lord really just reached into my soul and pulled stuff out that I didn't even knew was there, let alone belong there. And I really started to get to know the Lord through that experience. And I can say proudly here tonight that to you that it has been almost 6 years. It'll be 6 years on June 14th this year that I have been sober. I have not desired to run to that bottle for a very long time, for almost 6 years now. So I say that I was a drunk because alcoholics go to meetings, and I was not an alcoholic when I started going to Celebrate Recovery. Now, when I started going to Celebrate Recovery, it was under the guise that I was there to serve. See, we had just started our Celebrate Recovery when I started going, and we were learning how to do it as I was beginning to work my own recovery. And I thought I could use those old tactics and those old charms and those old ways of doing things. And little did I know that Principle 1 says that I have to realize that I'm not God and admit that I am powerless to control my tendency to do the wrong things, and that my life is unmanageable. And boy, was my life unmanageable. You see, that son I told you about and that second ex-wife didn't just disappear into the sunset. I couldn't see that son, and I was not in good terms with that ex-wife. It was painful that I couldn't see him, and I felt guilty and shameful that I couldn't go see him. And so I ran from it. I ran from those responsibilities, and I hid from being a dad to this little boy, this innocent little boy. And because of that, in 2017, his mom took me to court to have my parental rights removed, and she won that case because I was not a very good father to my son. Principle 2 says, earnestly believe that God exists and that I matter to him, and that he has the power to help me recover. You see, it was in those new low points, and if that would have happened to me when I was still drinking, I probably would have killed myself. There came a point in my lowest time when where I sat one night with a bottle in one hand and a 40 in the and a 40 caliber pistol in the other, and I took turns deciding which one I was going to take to my head. And that night the bottle won, and I really believe that it was God's intervention into that night that led me to where I am today. So we started our Celebrate Recovery in 2014, and I slowly worked my program and worked the steps and led our men's group for a while, and then in 2016, my friend Mike, our ministry leader, suddenly passed away. It was very sudden. He was on a hike, and he was here 1 minute and gone the next. And now I have a group of men and women looking to me and asking me what we're going to do. So, in a way, leadership of our Celebrate Recovery got thrusted upon me. So since that time on, I have been the ministry leader of the Celebrate Recovery at Uncommon Grounds. I have watched it transition from a regular Celebrate Recovery meeting, much like you all are used to, other than this quarantine, to something that looks more like a men's step study group. The women that were coming to our group were coming from a DOJ work release program that had closed. That was here local in Aliquippa. They had closed that facility, and one of the 3-quarter houses that was in the area closed also. So there were a lot of women that would come in and out of the cafe that would come to that group, and we came to a time where it was just us men showing up, and thank God, because I don't know what I would do without those men in my life now. They're some of my closest friends, some of my best of friends, people I really can call brothers, something that I'd been missing. During my recovery, I started to help others recover. I started working with other vets and started, as I healed, to help them to heal. I started to pursue what will be a future career in counseling, and started to work on my bachelor's. I'm currently enrolled at Liberty University in a bachelor's program of psychology, and then I'll go on to work on my master's. While I worked several jobs and worked to learn to recover, be a recovered person and a healed person, I made some mistakes along the way. I dated some people and still had these longings within me, and if it wasn't for my recovery family, I probably would still be stuck on step 4 or step 5. But it was because of my recovery family that I started to, as Principle 4 says, to openly examine and confess my faults to myself, to God, and someone I trust. And it was because of this that I started to see a counselor. And it was through counseling that I realized that I had been holding unforgiveness towards my mom. See, it was my mom that I told when I was 12 years old that I had been sexually abused. And it was my mom who said, "What do you want me to do?" And from that point on, I didn't trust my mom. As a matter of fact, I wanted nothing to do with her. I didn't want her in my life. I didn't want her near me. And I tried to run around the world to get away from her. And here I find myself living about 5 minutes away from her in the same town. So I came to a place where God said, "You need to forgive this woman." And I told him no. Folks, let me just stop this for a second. Don't ever tell God no, because he is going to make things difficult. He is going to remove his grace. And remove his grace he did. I lost my job. I failed a semester in college, and I had a very miserable summer and a lot of emotional pain. And finally I broke down and wrote her a letter, and we sat down over a cup of coffee at Uncommon Grounds, and I read this letter to her, and we cried, and we were reconciled to one another. And now I can tell you that I have not only a relationship with my mom, but a relationship with my dad and that little kid sister that I told you was in a car accident. She's doing all right. She has a son of her own. He's 7, and she's fully recovered from that accident. She has aspirations of becoming a nurse herself. And, because of my recovery, I've seen God directly moving in my family's life. He's drawn my sister into a closer relationship with him. I'm getting to know my nephew, and though he'll never be a replacement for my son, I get to be an uncle, and I get to be the cool uncle that he can aspire to be like. So I hope I've set a good example for him. Well, wouldn't you know it, that all this recovery and all this hard soul work that I've been doing led me to get in contact with my now boss. And he approached me and asked me if I'd be interested in helping him work on a little project. And that project is called Crop and Kettle, and that's where I work now, where I use the principles and the steps to help individuals who are eager to overcome their barriers to employment, and overcome their personal their internal barriers and external relational barriers that have been preventing them from finding meaningful work. We do that through the food services, through the food systems, and by being a literal from farm to table workforce training program. I helped my boss write our social development curriculum using our principles and frankly the Bible to teach our students how to live recovered lives, to be healed people. And as of Friday, we will have our first graduate of our program. At the time when we started writing the social development program, I didn't think I'd be working for the organization as well. But as the years went on and as I became a more healed person, I saw God increase my my ability to influence things and my ability to share what God had done in my life, my testimony with others, while still leading my small little band of brothers, and while still working full time and while still being a student. I helped write this program, and now I'm an employee of the organization, and I get to teach our students the very things that have helped me to become a recovered person. If I had to choose a life verse, and it's very hard for me to choose a life verse, there are several. Jesus says in Matthew 11, to come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. For my burden is light, and my yoke is easy. Come and learn from me, because I am humble and lowly of spirit. In my darkest hours, and I say plural hours, I find comfort in knowing that I can turn to Jesus, not just in those times, but in the good times too. You see, I struggle with moderate to severe depression, and it's partially from just genetic makeup, and it's also partially from being abused, and it's also from my experiences in my time in the Marine Corps, and so it hits me for a couple of months in this cyclic way, and it's in those times where I don't want to get up in the morning, and it takes an immense amount of energy just to put my shoes on, where I just feel numb all the time, that I can just turn to the Lord. Philippians 3:12 says, not that I have already obtained all this, or have already arrived at my goal, but I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of me. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it. But one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining towards what is ahead, I press on towards the goal, to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. So my life verse is those verses from Philippians 3. I love the book of Philippians. It's the place I turn often when I need comfort from the Lord, when I need to hear his voice. Paul's words to the Philippians are words that speak to my very soul. It was written to a bunch of soldiers who had fought in war, and I feel a kinship to those men and women and those families. But what Paul writes here, and he says, it's not that I've obtained it. I still get angry. I still curse sometimes. And I still fail. But what I do know is that I press on towards my heavenly goal. Before I wrap up, I have to tell you about this beautiful woman who's carrying our child. I met my wife Anna at church. Actually, I had met her at the cafe. I just happened to know that her family went to my church. And we would talk. We would talk about books, and we would talk about what she was learning in class those nights. And then we would just get to know one another. We got to know one another. So, for everyone who has heard, don't get married to anybody that you meet in a bar, I am here to tell you that is 100% accurate. It is a bad idea. I met my second wife in a bar, and that didn't turn out too well. But I met my forever wife at church. We found out that we were having our daughter, who was due in just a very short time. I think we're about 18 days away. And we found out last August that we were going to have her. Wow. Right after we had come back from a wedding. So you talk about a celebration. But through just all of the changes that have happened in my life, from being a broken kid to a lost Marine to a wayward soldier to a drunk to a failed father, I've seen God restore the years that the locusts have destroyed. It says that in Joel. And God has really not only restored joy to my life, but shown me where he's been every step of the way. So I want to leave you with that. And I hope that my story is a little bit of encouragement to you. And know that no matter where you are on your road to recovery, today is not too late or too early to take that first step and to admit that I am powerless. And to control my tendency to do the wrong thing, and that my life has become unmanageable. I promise you it's not an easy road. I promise you that there are setbacks and slips and falls along the way. But what I do promise you, that if you stick with it and press on and press in, the Lord will do a mighty work in you. So thank you for listening to my little story here, and God bless all of you.